He is the CEO and co-founder of Walker & Co., which has raised over $24 million from the likes of Google, John Legend, and Magic Johnson. He grew up in the projects in Queens, where his father was tragically shot and killed when he was only 3 years old. He received a full academic scholarship to a prestigious school, which would see him graduate valedictorian over the children of the likes of Fords and Rockefellers. He's a personal inspiration of mine. He is Tristan Walker, and this is my take on his top 5 secrets to success.
First bit of advice came from Tyler Perry, the famous director, kind of movie producer, that sort of thing, right? About 2 years ago, I had the good fortune to interview him one-on-one in 3 different cities around the country, where he got to speak about his entrepreneurial story to a bunch of small business owners around the country. Tyler Perry is did his thing. He was homeless for a while, right? Now he's like the highest paid dude in Hollywood, right? Really fascinating story. I'm interviewing him one-on-one. Start the Q&A. One woman raises her hand, stands up. She says, "Mr. Perry, we have to always go through these different trials and tribulations as entrepreneurs. Like, what keeps you going, right? How do you get back up and just go, right?" He said the most profound thing that I had ever heard. He said, the minute he realized that the trials that you go through, right, and the blessings you receive are the exact same thing, like that freed him as an entrepreneur, right? Like, just think about that for a second. Like, I kind of stopped the interview because I had to soak that up for a little bit, right? Like, every single kind of trial, tribulation, all that stuff that you go through, it's just a lesson, right? And that lesson is just an inherent blessing, right? So as entrepreneurs, like, this entrepreneur thing is hard, right? Like, at times it's amazing, at times it sucks, right? And I've been very blessed and fortunate to have really good opportunities, but it's very, very hard, right? And you don't want to stress yourself out unnecessarily. And what that lesson taught me was that I didn't have to be as stressed out, right? Like, I'm going to go through these issues. They're just lessons. Let me treat that as a blessing. We're going to move, right? And a lot of folks look at me when I start this company and they're like, "Tristan, you're way more calm than you should be." And it's like, yeah, because I fundamentally understand this lesson that I learned. When I was at Lehman Brothers and working in finance, there's a gentleman, his name was Bill Lighton, and he was a managing director, African-American, most senior guy at the firm, and called me in his office one day and he said, "Tristan, I figured out life. Sit down, I'm gonna tell you how to live your life." So I'm like, "All right, tell me, Bill." And he said, "Tristan, you wanna spend the first third of your life learning, right? The second third of your life earning, and the last third returning, right?" Now here's a guy, he left Yale when he was 20, he started working on Wall Street. The day he turned 40, he quit. He could have been way more successful, acquired way more wealth, but now he's dedicating his entire life to philanthropic efforts, right? And the reason he kind of ordered it in that way, he said too many people try and put the returning thing before the earning thing, which prevents them from scaling their returning efforts, right? So when I think about my career, I talk about wealth a little bit facetiously, but it's a means to that very end, right? So I think, I've done the learning thing and I continue to. How do I shorten the earning thing to maximize my ability to return and give back to the community? If I was going to dedicate the next 10 plus years of my life to anything, I wanted to fundamentally feel like I was the best person in the world to solve that problem, right? When you look at like a lot of the entrepreneurs that either you're inspired by, certainly for me, they had this one thing about them that that kind of carried with each one. They had this unique authenticity to the thing that they were trying to build, right? And one thing that you'll realize if any of you kind of want to become entrepreneurs, like, you have no idea how much of a comparative advantage that is relative to everyone else, right? There are a lot of entrepreneurs that are entrepreneurs for the sake of being entrepreneurs, right? But once you have that authenticity, you can't, it's very, very hard to lose, right?
How did you come to Walker & Company and the Bevel line of products?
Yeah, so when I left Foursquare, I joined Andreessen Horowitz as an entrepreneur in residence there. Ben Horowitz at the time said, "Come spend 9 months with us to figure out what you want to do." I spent all 9 months there, and I spent the first 7 months there wasting their time, right? Just chasing things that I wasn't uniquely qualified to do. They were ambitious, but I wasn't going to be the best person to do it. And I said, if I'm going to dedicate the next 20 plus years of my life to anything, I wanted to fundamentally feel like I was the best person in the world to solve said problem.
Yeah.
And it hit me 7 months later. And Ben would always, from the kind of Peter Thiel school of thought, he'd always encourage me to think of the one thing that you believe that few people in the world believe. And I had 2. The first really pertaining to culture, right? I had this fundamental belief That all global culture is led by American culture, which is led by black culture in the US, if you think about food and music and dance, et cetera.
Yeah.
And a big frustration of mine is my living in the earliest adopting region in the world, and it's knowing very little about the earliest adopting culture. That discord makes zero sense to me. And then the second view of the world that I had pertained to health and beauty consumer packaged goods companies. I think they're all doomed for all types of business model and structural reasons. But I always talk about my experience of going to these retailers, going to some shelf that has some dirty, outdated packaging that hasn't been updated for decades, right? And it's a second-class citizen experience that this community shouldn't have, right? And you loop in Latino and Asian folks as well. We're the majority of the country in 20, 30 years, let alone the majority of the world, and we still have this second-class citizen experience. So I felt that there was an amazing opportunity to put those two views of the world together to build a very special health and beauty products company focused uniquely on the needs of people of color and leverage everything that I've learned in Silicon Valley to really reimagine the build-out of a kind of next-generation consumer packaged goods company. I got some advice a couple years ago from a marketing executive, and it stuck with me for a long time. And this kind of relates to personal brand or your company or whatever. He said, Tristan, brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is, right? And the minute you realize that, you start to really understand the importance of the thing that you're trying to build, right? When it comes to like personal brand, like, whether it be on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff, like I'm pretty ridiculous. If you're following me on all these services, like I apologize, because I'm pretty, I'm pretty heavy on every single one of them, but it's only because I care so much about, my own personal story, and no one else should be telling my story, right? And the thing that a lot of folks really don't get about brand is that sometimes it's okay for people to be a jerk. If you're consistently a jerk, that's cool, right? If you're consistently nice, that's cool. Where the problems happen is when you kind of break from that consistency, right? So as long as you understand that like brand is what other people say it is, that allows you to kind of manage your own, right? And like that has stuck with me for a really, really long time, and I think has benefited not only just me, but my company and every company that I kind of create from here on.
I'd love to drill down on that.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, especially we've got a room full of lots of young people who probably have a primordial brand at this point, right? At what age should people start thinking about their brand? Is this something, when you're a little kid, you start thinking about this? Is it when you get in the professional world? At what point, and how do you really start crafting it?
Well, it's become different for me, right? Because, things like Twitter didn't exist 10 years ago, right? Now your brand is public, right? Everyone's talking about it, and you might think that people aren't talking about you, but they probably are, right? Like there are haters everywhere, right? People will care enough about other people to be able to like try and bring them down, right? So as long as, and maybe that's an inherent cynicism, right, about everyone, but I believe it to be true. So now we're in a world where kind of your life is public. You better take control of it before someone else does, right? As early as you have the ability to control your own personal brand publicly online, I think you should be doing it.